5 kids vanished that summer. No one talked about it after. Claire moved away, changed her name, forgot how the chalk felt in her hand. But now, a box of old drawings has arrived, and one of them has her face. The house hasn't forgotten. It's waiting. Before we begin, hit subscribe. Claire hadn't seen the street in over 20 years, but it looked the same. The houses still sat in quiet rows, tucked neatly behind trimmed hedges and fences that leaned ever so slightly. Number 6, the red one, still had its porch light burned out, even though no one had lived there since before the last frost of that summer. The pavement had cracked just slightly more, the sidewalk chalk long since washed away, but the cul-de-sac felt untouched, preserved even. She pulled the rental car to a slow stop in front of her childhood home. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound on a street that didn't seem to breathe anymore. A sparrow flitted between 2 bare trees, its wings fluttering like a nervous heartbeat, then was gone. No welcome, no wind, just quiet. In the passenger seat sat a letter, postmarked without a return address, and inside it, a drawing. Crayon on yellowing paper. Claire had unfolded it 5 times since it arrived the week before. She unfolded it again. It was a child's map of Brier Lane. Slanted rectangles for houses, stick-figure trees, a crooked cul-de-sac. All the houses were outlined in black except one, number 6, which was colored bright red, waxy and uneven. And in the lower corner, written in shaky, oversized handwriting, Claire, come back. She hadn't told anyone. Not her partner, not her therapist, not even her mother. She'd simply packed a small bag, called in sick, and made the 6-hour drive on a gray Wednesday afternoon. Because she knew the drawing, not the paper or the handwriting, but the style. It looked exactly like the way Michael used to draw. Michael, who disappeared first. Michael, whose shoes were found near the edge of the woods, facing the wrong way. Michael, who was never found. Claire folded the paper carefully, gently, like a memory that could tear. She slid it back into her bag and stepped out of the car. The cold settled quickly, thin and damp, the kind that clung to the skin and crept under your coat. The houses watched her silently as she walked. The windows all looked empty. Maybe they were. Maybe they'd always been. She paused in front of number 6. The porch was intact. No tape, no signs of repair, just stillness. The front steps had a fine dusting of frost, undisturbed. But one step bore something faint, a smear of red, like a wax crayon dragged once across the wood, almost erased by weather but not quite gone. Claire didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, she turned toward her childhood house. Number 4. The white one with the split driveway and the cracked bird bath still sunk into the yard. The front door had been changed, painted a soft green, but the wind chimes were the same. Ceramic stars that never chimed. They swayed gently now, making no sound at all. She unlocked the door. It stuck. It always had. Inside, the air was colder than outside. She hadn't asked the real estate agent to turn the heat on. That would have felt too permanent. The house had been sitting empty since her mother moved into assisted living, and no one had stayed there since. She had expected dust, silence, maybe echoes of something unspoken. What she didn't expect was the smell. Not rot, not mold, but chalk. The scent of ground chalk, the kind used on sidewalks, faint and dry, like the memory of summer afternoons and skinned knees. Claire walked to the back window and looked out over the backyard. Beyond the small fence, number 6 stood silent and still, its shutters pulled tightly closed. Something moved inside. Just a flicker, a shadow near the stairs, no more than a second. Then nothing. Claire didn't panic. She didn't even flinch, because a part of her, The part that never truly left this place had been waiting for someone to wave back. Claire didn't sleep well. The house was colder than she remembered, not in temperature but in presence. Something about it felt like a room after someone leaves, still holding the shape of them in the air. Her childhood bedroom had been stripped bare years ago, but she'd brought a sleeping bag and laid it out beneath the window like she used to when the summer nights were too hot to sleep in the bed. Back then, she would count stars. Tonight, she counted the seconds between silence. Outside, the wind moved like a whisper, trying not to be heard. She woke just after 5, not to a sound, but to the absence of one. The furnace had stopped humming. The wind had quieted. Even the distant traffic was missing. It was as if the world had taken a breath and was holding it. Claire pulled on her coat and padded quietly down the stairs. Her breath fogged faintly in the kitchen. She didn't bother with coffee. Just unlocked the front door and opened it, hoping the cold would make her feel more real. And then she saw it. A piece of paper, thick, white, not weathered, tucked gently beneath the welcome mat. The edges were dry, untouched by frost, like it had only just been placed there. She bent down slowly, her fingers trembling slightly before she touched it. Another drawing. This one was different. Still crayon, still childlike, but more detailed. It showed the cul-de-sac again, now with 6 houses drawn in sequence, each with a stick figure in front. The figures were labeled Michael, June, Liam, Abby, Ray, and beneath the last one, standing alone, Claire. Each figure was smiling, except hers. The red house, number 6, loomed taller in the drawing than in real life. Its windows were colored black, behind them faint shapes. Not people exactly. Shadows with curved shoulders, no faces. She turned the page over. Nothing. No message this time, just the drawing. Claire stared at it for a long time before going back inside. She set the picture down on the kitchen table and sat across from it as if it were going to speak. It didn't, but it felt like it might. A drawing should not feel like it's breathing. She found herself whispering, "Who drew this?" But she already knew the handwriting, or thought she did. She remembered how Michael would always outline things in black, said it made them more real. How June would color the grass in long lines instead of sideways. How Abby added hearts to every window. Claire could see all of that in the details now. This drawing wasn't from one person, it was from all of them, as if the group had drawn it together, as if they were still drawing. Later that morning, she walked to the end of the cul-de-sac. She hadn't intended to. She told herself she was just going out for air, but her feet found their old rhythm, and before long, she stood in front of the red house. Number 6. It still looked empty. Shutters drawn, porch light out, the kind of silence that made you think twice before knocking. She didn't. Not yet. Instead, she stepped to the edge of the porch and looked down. A trail of faint marks led away from the house. Not footprints, but lines. Wax, crayon, red. Drawn directly on the cement walkway. They formed a path, one that curved in small spirals before returning to the base of the stairs. Almost like someone had been trying to draw a door, again and again, until they got it right. Claire knelt and traced a fingertip along the line. It flaked slightly under her touch, still fresh. She stood and looked at the front door. There was no sound, but she felt it. Something waiting on the other side, not watching, not threatening, just waiting, like a story paused mid-sentence. That night, as the wind picked up and the old chimes swayed once again without sound, Claire sat at her childhood desk and spread both drawings out in front of her. The map, the portrait of the 6th. She noticed something she hadn't before. On the second drawing, the red house was taller, too tall. 3 stories at least, but number 6 had always been 2 stories, just like the others. She went to the window, pulled back the curtain, and stared across the cul-de-sac. The red house stood silent, still 2 stories. But in the upstairs window, the one closest to the chimney, a light flicked on, faint, like candlelight, and then went out. Claire stepped back from the window, heart pounding. She hadn't imagined it. She knew she hadn't, because when she returned to the desk, the drawing had changed. In the topmost window of the red house, a new detail had been added. A stick figure, small, alone, smiling. Claire returned to the red house the next morning. She didn't decide to, not in a way she could explain. Her feet moved before her thoughts did. The street was silent, the frost beginning to melt into the edges of the curb, and the sky hung low with the soft gray stillness that winter often wore like a coat. Number 6 had not changed, but she had. Something about the second drawing, the small figure in the upper window smiling, had stayed with her all night. She had barely slept, turning between memories and questions she couldn't frame aloud. The feeling wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like something unfinished pressing into the corners of her thoughts. The porch boards groaned under her step. The door had no bell. She tried the knob, still locked. Claire hesitated, then stepped to the side and peeked under the welcome mat. A key, old brass, cold. She didn't remember this house ever having a welcome mat. The key turned easily in the lock. The door opened with a sound like a breath caught in the throat. Inside, the air was dry. Not musty, preserved. Claire stepped in slowly, her boots quiet against the old wooden floor. The house smelled of dust, paint, and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers kept too long in a box. The living room was furnished, not staged like a property ready for sale, but lived in. A sun-bleached couch, a coffee table with faint ring stains, a dusty bookshelf. Everything held a film of age, but nothing seemed abandoned. It was as if time had paused here, not passed. She crossed into the hallway. Each door was closed. She touched the first one, left side, nearest the stairwell. It creaked open into a small den. Wallpaper peeled slightly in one corner, but the room was intact. The next door led to a bathroom, then a guest room. She paused at the fourth door. It was locked. The hallway continued, narrowing slightly. Then, a door she didn't remember. It was smaller than the others, painted the same beige as the walls, almost invisible if you weren't looking directly at it. Claire reached out. The doorknob was cold, but not locked. It resisted slightly as she turned it. Not from a bolt, but from age, or maybe reluctance. The door opened. The room was small, windowless, barely large enough for a bed. And yet, she knew. This was the room. The one the drawings hinted at. The one where Michael had said he was going before he disappeared. Claire stepped inside. The air was warmer here, almost unnaturally so. The light from the hallway barely touched the far wall, but she could just make out marks, small indentations near the floor. She knelt, brushing dust aside with her hand. Crayon lines, faint, red, a circle, imperfect and half-finished, as if someone had started to draw something and had been stopped midway. She touched it gently. The warmth deepened, not physically but emotionally, like standing in a room that remembered something important, something painful. Claire backed out slowly, her breath shallow. As she reached the hallway again, the air shifted. A low creak from upstairs. She froze. Then, nothing. Just the soft hush of the house breathing around her, walls quietly settling like they always had. But she knew what she had to do next. She climbed the stairs. Each step creaked under her weight, old wood sighing with memory. At the top, a narrow landing opened into 3 doors. She opened the first, a child's bedroom. Faded wallpaper with tiny stars, a bed with no sheets, a dresser with a broken drawer. On the desk was a photograph, face down. She turned it over. 6 children, standing in front of number 6, smiling. Her breath caught. They were all there. Michael, June, Liam, Abby, Ray, and her. But in the photo she was turned away, looking back toward the house, as if distracted. She'd never seen this photo before. Claire put it down and turned toward the second upstairs room. It was empty, unfurnished. The third room was locked. She stepped closer. The door was clean, no dust, as if someone had opened it recently. And on the wall beside it, just above the light switch, was something drawn in red wax. A smile, childlike, just 2 curved lines, simple and waiting. Claire stepped back. The hallway darkened slightly, even though the sun outside had not changed. She turned and walked quickly down the stairs, past the warm room with the crayon circle, past the bookshelf, past the coffee table ringed by someone else's forgotten tea. Outside, the cold hit her like a question. And she had no answer, not yet. But when she returned home, there was another drawing waiting on her doorstep, folded once. No envelope, no message, just an image. The red house. 1 door open, and 6 stick figures inside. 1 was circled in red, her name beneath it. Claire. The audio tape was in a box marked Junk, 2003. Claire found it in the basement of her mother's house the next morning, after waking to the sound of wind that wasn't moving the trees. She hadn't intended to look through the past, but some part of her had known, even before she opened the lid, that there would be something in that box. Something left behind, or maybe something that had waited. The cassette was unlabeled, its case cracked. Beneath it were a few old Polaroids, mostly washed out. Birthday parties, someone's dog, a crooked picture of the cul-de-sac. Claire didn't remember taking any of them. Or maybe she just didn't want to. She dusted off her father's old tape player, the one with the faint burn mark near the volume dial, and pressed play. At first, just static. A few quiet pops. Then, children's laughter. Claire froze. She recognized it. All of it. The pitch of Abby's giggle. The way Liam always shouted too loudly, too close to the mic. The breathy, squeaky whisper that was Ray when she got excited. And her own voice, higher, thinner, saying, "Let's play again. I'll count this time." Another voice, softer. Michael. "No, let's do the 6th room again. It's better when we all hide." Someone hesitated. "June. We're not supposed to use the red house. My mom said it's still empty." A long pause. Then Claire's own voice again, quiet, almost a whisper. "It's not empty." I saw the light come on. Laughter, footsteps, the sound of wind through the mic. And then counting, but not by any of the children. It was deeper, slow, deliberate. 1, 2, 3. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even unkind, but it wasn't right. It skipped, almost casually. 6, 7, 11. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The recording continued with faint rustling, more laughter. But it had changed. The tones were quieter, distant, as if someone had walked away from the group and taken the recorder with them. There was a faint creak, a door, and then, just before the tape cut off, a whisper, so faint she could barely catch it. "Found you?" Then silence. Claire sat for a long time before ejecting the tape. She didn't know why it had been recorded or who had left it behind, but she knew where it ended, in the red house. The sound of the creaking door. It matched the one upstairs, the locked room. She turned the tape over in her hand. There was a name scratched faintly into the plastic. Claire. She returned to number 6 that afternoon. The house opened like it had been waiting. The key slid more easily into the lock this time, as though it had grown used to her. Upstairs, she didn't hesitate. The third room was still locked. the red wax smile still marked beside the switch. But now, on the door itself, something had been added. Handprints, small ones, several, smudged into the dust like children had pressed their palms against the wood and left them behind. Claire reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the drawing that had been left that morning, the one with 6 figures and the open door. One figure was circled, hers. She pressed her palm against the wood. The door clicked. She pushed it open. The room was wrong, not unfamiliar, but impossible. It was too large, far larger than the footprint of the house. The ceiling was high, curved like a chapel, and the wallpaper was made of drawings, layered, overlapping, thousands of them, all in crayon, all childlike, some torn, some half-finished. And in the center of the room, placed gently on the floor, was a circle of sidewalk chalk. Inside the circle, a shoe, small, worn, blue with a yellow lightning bolt. Claire remembered it instantly. Michael's. She had helped him draw that lightning bolt in chalk once, the week before he was gone. She stepped into the room. The door behind her didn't close. It didn't need to. The room wasn't threatening, just waiting. In the far corner, another figure, not moving, just watching. A girl, her own age, number not her age, her younger self. Claire, age 11, in a denim jacket, braided hair. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She simply raised one finger and pointed to the wall, to a drawing hung just above the window. Claire turned. It was the red house again, but not drawn from the outside. It was drawn from inside. The view was from a window, looking out at the cul-de-sac, from the top floor. In the foreground, a hand holding a red crayon. Claire looked back at her younger self. She was gone. Only the circle of chalk and the shoe remained. And the drawing still watched the window. The drawing wouldn't leave her alone. Claire had taken it from the red house, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her coat pocket. But by the time she reached her front porch, she could feel it. Warm. Not in temperature, but in weight. Like it wanted to be seen again. Inside, she placed it on the kitchen table and stared at it for hours. The perspective was all wrong. No child could have drawn it that way. Not from imagination. The angle was too specific. The shadows fell exactly as they had that afternoon. It wasn't a drawing of the red house. It was a drawing from the red house. The hand holding the crayon wasn't her own. Not quite. The fingers were too thin, the wrist too small. But something about the posture, the way the lines were drawn with hesitation at first, and then certainty. It felt like memory trying to come back. Claire tried to look away. She couldn't. The edges of the paper curled slightly in the warmth of the kitchen. The colors remained vivid. And in the corner, written so faintly it almost vanished against the background, was a phrase, "Draw where you want to go." She read it 3 times. Then a 4th. By the 5th, she was pulling an old notebook from her childhood desk. She opened it to a blank page, picked up a pencil. Her hand hovered. This was absurd. But she remembered the circle drawn in the warm room, the crayon lines on the floor, the growing impossibility of the upstairs room, too big, too curved, too knowing. What would happen if she drew? She lowered the pencil and began to sketch. She drew a door. Simple, narrow. The kind they had in the older houses, the ones that never quite shut all the way. She added a handle, a keyhole, a light above it. And then she shaded in the crack beneath the door. Just a line of darkness, nothing dramatic. She stared at it when she was done. Then, slowly, she closed the notebook. It was only a few minutes before she heard the sound. A faint thud. Not in the kitchen, not outside, inside the house. Claire stood. Her breath caught as the air changed, not colder, but expectant. She turned in a slow circle, listening. Then she saw it. Down the hall, near the old linen closet, where the wallpaper curled at the seams and the floorboards creaked slightly if you stepped in just the right place. A door. Not one she remembered. Not one that had ever been there before. It looked exactly like the one she had drawn. The light above it flickered faintly. The handle was brass, dulled with age. And beneath the door, just as she'd sketched, a thin line of shadow bled across the floor like something remembering how to be solid. She stepped closer. Each footfall felt padded, like the air had thickened. The walls around her didn't move, but they felt closer somehow. Claire touched the doorknob. Warm. She turned it. The door swung open. Behind it, a room she hadn't seen since she was a child. The classroom, her fourth-grade classroom. Mrs. Lehman's room with the faded globe, the alphabet banner, and the stained whiteboard that never quite erased cleanly. She blinked. There was no smell, no sound. Only the faint echo of chairs scraping and children whispering just below hearing. On the teacher's desk sat a folded piece of paper. Claire stepped through the doorway, heart pounding. The paper was blank. She turned it over, and there, drawn in pencil with soft, careful strokes, the red house again. But this time, it wasn't just one image. It was a sequence. 4 frames in a row. A comic strip, maybe, or a memory breaking apart into moments. Frame 1, the 6 children playing hopscotch. Frame 2, Michael turning away. Frame 3, Michael standing at the front door of the red house, crayon in hand. Frame 4, the door opened behind him, a tall figure drawn in gray. Claire stepped back. The door she'd entered through was gone. Not shut. Gone. The classroom wall now stood solid behind her. The only exit, another door. This one drawn in chalk on the blackboard, its edges glowing faintly, and above it, in small white script, "Draw the way out." Claire turned to the blank paper. Her hand shook as she picked up the stub of chalk from the desk. She didn't know where to go, but she remembered something, an image from a drawing Michael had once made. A treehouse, tall, safe, high enough that the house couldn't reach. She drew it now, not perfectly, but carefully. A rope ladder, a wooden trap door, a lantern in the window. She closed her eyes and pressed the drawing to the chalkboard. When she opened them, the door had changed. It now bore the rough sketch lines of a trap door, half open. Claire stepped through. She emerged back in her mother's kitchen, but the drawing was gone. So was the notebook. Only one thing remained, resting on the kitchen floor near the table leg. A crayon, red, used, dull. Still warm, the red house no longer felt empty. Claire returned just after sunset, though the sun hadn't so much set as faded. The sky above Brier Lane had dimmed slowly, as if light were being absorbed instead of replaced. Her footsteps echoed differently now, not louder, but slower, like the air was stretching time. The front door of number 6 was unlocked. It had been locked that morning. Claire pushed it open and stepped inside. This time the house greeted her with warmth. Not cozy warmth, but the kind that clings, like air exhaled from something that shouldn't breathe. She stood in the entryway, letting her eyes adjust. The interior looked the same as before. Worn furniture, shelves half-filled, curtains drawn against a dusk that pressed in close. But now there were sounds. Faint laughter, not distant, not recorded, but nearby. Children, giggling, whispering, playing. Claire followed the sound. It led her to the staircase, then down the narrow hall, to the warm room with the unfinished red circle on the floor. The door was slightly ajar now. A soft light spilled through the gap. She opened it fully, and paused. The room had changed. The wallpaper was gone. The floors were clean, polished even. A toy box sat beneath the window, lid askew. A lamp in the corner glowed with amber light. But what caught her breath was the game board in the center of the room. It was homemade, squares drawn on construction paper taped together. Plastic figures stood on spaces labeled things like hopscotch, secret base, snack break, and the sixth room. One of the figures was Claire's. Someone had drawn her face in marker, tiny but unmistakable. Her game piece stood 3 squares behind Michael's. Claire stepped into the room. The laughter stopped. The air grew thick. On the toy box, someone had placed a notebook. She recognized it. It was hers, the one from her own house, but it had changed. The cover was different now. It looked older, worn from use. The pages inside were no longer blank. They were filled with drawings. Not hers. The first page showed the 6 children, all of them, sitting in a circle. Beneath it, in neat block letters, "Our last game." The second page showed Michael standing alone in front of the red house, holding a crayon. The third page was torn. Claire turned the page, and her breath caught. The fourth showed a new scene. Her, older, standing at the edge of the circle of chalk, watching, hesitating. Someone had drawn her just as she was now. At the bottom of the page, in soft pencil, "She never came in. So we stayed." Claire's hands shook. She remembered that day, vaguely, like a smudged page in a book. They were playing tag or hide and seek, and Michael had said they should all go into the red house one more time. Just for a minute, he'd said. But Claire had gone home. She hadn't wanted to play anymore. It was getting dark. Her mother was calling her in. She left. And the next morning, Michael was gone. Then June, then Liam, one by one. And now, here, in this room that remembered too much, the truth settled over her. They hadn't disappeared. They had been kept, not taken, not harmed, held, somewhere between memory and story. Claire flipped to the last page. It was blank, except for a question, scrawled in the same childlike hand. "Can we finish the game now?" She stood slowly, her knees stiff from kneeling on the floor. A soft sound came from the hall, footsteps, bare, light. Claire turned but saw nothing. Then, the game board moved, not all at once, just one piece, her marker. It slid forward 1 square. Claire didn't touch it. The air changed again. Not cold, not hot, but full, like someone had taken a breath just behind her. The window curtain fluttered, though the glass was shut. Claire stepped backward, her heart thudding. A whisper passed through the room, not in words, but in feeling. Something like, "You were supposed to stay." She didn't answer aloud. She walked out of the room, down the hall, and back out the front door. The night air hit her hard, crisp and real. She didn't look back. Not yet. But when she reached her own porch, there was something waiting again. Not a drawing this time, a photo, old, faded, corners curled. It showed 5 children sitting in the living room of the red house. Claire stood behind them, watching through the window. On the back, written in faded pencil, "Where did you go?" The girl was waiting in the mirror. Claire had gone to the bathroom to splash water on her face, to ground herself, to prove she was still real, that the air outside the red house still obeyed time, that her reflection would look the way it always had, older, tired, trying to remember things she had spent years learning how to forget. But the face that stared back wasn't hers. It was her at age 11. Same eyes, same hairline, same way her lips pressed together when she was scared but didn't want anyone to know. The girl didn't blink. Claire stepped back. The reflection didn't. For a heartbeat, the silence between them grew too large. Then the girl raised her hand and pointed. Not at Claire, at the hallway behind her. Claire turned. Empty, but when she looked back, The mirror showed something else. The hallway was not empty. In the reflection, the wallpaper had changed. Toys littered the floor. The light at the end of the hall was warmer, flickering like candlelight. And the girl, Claire, 11, stepped away from the mirror and walked down that hall. Claire spun to follow, but her hallway remained unchanged. Old, quiet, real. Still, she walked. At the end of her hallway, Claire reached the attic stairs. She hadn't opened that door in over a decade. She climbed slowly, her flashlight flickering once as if to protest. The air grew thinner with each step, colder too, as if the attic were a separate season altogether. Dust motes floated in quiet spirals. The attic was as she remembered: boxes, old Christmas decorations, forgotten furniture. But in the far corner, tucked behind a stack of her father's college books, was something she did not remember. A door. Small. Wooden. Painted with peeling white enamel. No knob. It was the kind of door a child would draw, oddly proportioned, centered in the wall as if it had always been waiting to be noticed. Claire stepped closer. A child's handwriting had been scrawled across the bottom in crayon. Claire's room. Keep out. Her heart tightened. She placed her hand flat against the wood. Warm. The door opened inward. Inside, her childhood room. But not the one from photographs. This was the memory of it. Exactly as it had been on the last night before Michael disappeared. Stuffed animals arranged by height. A poster of a comet, taped crookedly to the wall. A notebook on the bed, flipped to a half-finished drawing of a ladder reaching into clouds, and sitting on the bed, barefoot, legs swinging lightly. Claire. The younger version didn't look surprised. She looked tired. "Hi," she said softly. Claire nodded, unsure what to say. The girl looked down at the floor. "We were supposed to play one more round. You left." Claire swallowed. "I didn't know it would. I didn't know it meant something." "You heard it." Claire nodded slowly. "The counting," the girl said. "It skipped numbers. That's how you knew it wasn't real." Claire sat beside her younger self. "They didn't touch." "I got scared," she said quietly. The girl looked at her. "So did we. But we stayed." Claire didn't speak. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of an old wall clock that hadn't worked since 2002. Then the girl said, "He's still in there, you know. Michael. The others too." Claire felt the tears before she knew they were coming. "They're not. Are they okay?" The girl's eyes softened. "They're waiting. They think you'll come back." Claire wiped her cheek. "What happens if I don't?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she slid something off her wrist and held it out. A bracelet. Plastic beads, strung in alternating red and white. The kind they used to make at summer camp. On it, the letters spelled CLAIRE6. Claire took it. As her fingers closed around the plastic, the room began to fade. Not vanish, not break. Just fade, like a memory finally ready to let go. The bed, the poster, the girl, all softening at the edges. Claire stood. The door behind her was gone. But there was a window now, cracked open, cold air drifting in. And beyond it, the red house. Its attic window was open too. And in that window, 6 figures stood in silhouette. One of them waved. Back in her home, Claire found a new drawing waiting beneath her pillow. She hadn't been in bed. She hadn't even been upstairs. But there it was, folded, creased once. This one wasn't in crayon. It was pencil, faint, rushed. It showed the red house, the attic windows glowing, and in the margin, in a child's handwriting, "You can still finish the game. We're almost done." Claire remembered the sidewalk. She remembered how they used to fill it. Every summer, every stretch of sun-drenched concrete between the driveways of Brier Lane, with drawings, games, mazes, pretend worlds that ran from number 1 all the way to the curve at number 6. and she remembered the circles. They had started as a game. Chalk portals, Michael called them. Whoever stood in got to make a wish. Sometimes it was silly. A puppy, a snow day, a chocolate milk fountain. But other times, Claire stepped outside just after sunrise, the grass still beaded with cold. She carried a bucket of water and a sponge, not because she planned to clean anything, but because she needed to know if they were still there. She reached the edge of the sidewalk in front of the red house, and she saw it, faint, almost erased. A chalk circle, drawn in red and white, a little crooked, slightly oval, but unmistakably one of theirs. Claire dropped to her knees. She dipped the sponge in the bucket and pressed it to the pavement. The chalk blurred slightly, then returned. Stronger, clearer, as if the water had woken it up. Claire's heart began to race. She looked up and down the street. Empty, silent, no cars, no windows open. The cul-de-sac might as well have been held in a moment. She turned back to the circle. Inside, faint letters had been written in the center. June. Her breath caught. The next sidewalk square, just a few steps ahead, bore another, Liam. She stood, water forgotten, and followed them. One after another, faded chalk rings, left exactly where the children had stood all those years ago, each with a name inside. A quiet record of a moment just before something changed. Claire kept walking. Abby Ray. And then, at the bend in the sidewalk, where the path turned toward number 6, she saw her own. Drawn smaller, like it had been done quickly, almost an afterthought. Claire. But something was different. Hers was the only circle not filled in. The lines were faint, incomplete. The chalk had broken before it was finished, or maybe it had never been drawn all the way. She crouched beside it and remembered. Michael had drawn hers. She had said no, said she didn't want to play anymore, but he insisted, said the game couldn't end unless everyone had a circle. He'd started to draw it, and she'd run home. Before it was done, before she had stepped inside. Claire closed her eyes, and suddenly she heard it again, the counting voice from the old cassette tape. 5, 6, 7, 11. Her hands trembled. The red house loomed behind her, quiet and still. Back inside her home, she opened her old photo album. Near the back, tucked behind a loose snapshot of her 5th grade play, was a folded paper, unfamiliar. She unfolded it carefully. Another drawing, but this one wasn't of the red house. It was of her own house, the kitchen window, and in the corner, inside a small chalk circle, Claire, as a child, sitting with her arms wrapped around her knees. A line of red connected her circle to the red house. Claire traced it with her finger. It passed over 3 more circles along the way. Paths, connections, a map. She flipped the paper over. 4 words were written on the back. Finish what we started. She spent the rest of the day collecting things. The broken bracelet her younger self had given her, the photographs, the notebook with the comic strip sequence, and one last item she hadn't dared to touch until now, the red crayon. She held it gently, surprised by how solid it felt in her hand. Not soft or waxy, but firm, grounded, like it had soaked up the weight of everything that had been asked of it. That night, she returned to the red house. This time, she went through the back. The door opened with no resistance. The house exhaled softly, as if relieved to see her. She found the children's game board still spread on the floor, but it had changed. Now there were 7 pieces. The 6th stood at the center square, circled in red. The 7th, hers, rested just outside the edge of the board. Claire placed her piece on the square beside Michael's. Immediately the room warmed. The crayon in her hand pulsed slightly, like a heartbeat, and across the wall, a new circle began to draw itself in red wax, slow, deliberate, completing the one that had never been finished. Above it, one word appeared in blocky handwriting. Ready? The circle on the wall glowed faintly. Not with light exactly, but with attention. Like the house had turned toward her, fully and without hesitation. No more games, no more whispered memories. Only one question remained. Claire stood in the center of the room, the red crayon in her hand warm now, nearly hot. The game board at her feet shimmered, its hand-drawn pieces trembling slightly, as if waiting for a move. The room had changed again. It looked smaller, not because it was closing in, but because it was drawing closer. Walls curving gently inward, the ceiling slightly lower than she remembered. The air was thick, like breath held just under the surface of water. She stepped toward the wall. The red circle was complete now. Inside it, a faint shimmer, not color, not motion, just possibility. She touched the center. The wall yielded, softly, like stepping through fog. The space beyond the wall was narrow and dim, not a hallway, not a tunnel, just space, folded into itself. She walked forward, the crayon still in her grip, and the world around her muted into soft hums and breath-like warmth. Then, a room. It was not part of the house she knew. No blueprints could have held this. The walls were paper, thick parchment, drawn on in every color of crayon, chalk, pencil, and ink. The drawings layered and overlapped. Stars, houses, games, names, symbols. Each one carried the careful, uneven hand of a child. In the center, a table, and around it, 5 children. Michael, June, Liam, Abby, Ray. They looked exactly as they had the day they disappeared. No older, no different, only more still. They weren't statues, they weren't ghosts. They were something in between, held. Like photographs pinned inside the house's memory. They turned to her as one. And they smiled. Michael stood first. He walked to her, barefoot, his smile shy. "We knew you'd come back." Claire's voice caught in her throat. "Why are you still here?" He looked around. "We stayed." "But you didn't have to." He tilted his head. "We did. You never finished the circle." She closed her eyes, the crayon shaking in her hand. "I didn't know what it meant." "You do now." He held something out to her, a folded paper. She took it and opened it slowly. It was a drawing, one she hadn't made, but somehow recognized. The 6 of them, standing outside the red house, holding hands, the door open behind them, light spilling out. And this time, the 7th figure was there too, her. In the margin, one sentence had been written in delicate, wavering pencil. "You can let us go, but something must stay behind." Claire's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" Michael's voice was quiet. "The house doesn't keep people. It keeps stories. The ones that are never finished." June spoke next. "We were a story without an ending." Abby nodded. "It remembered us so we wouldn't disappear completely." "You can finish it now," Michael said. "You can end it the right way." Claire looked down at the paper again. Her own figure stared back at her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "What does it want?" The air shifted. The paper in her hands curled slightly, as if touched by wind. And a voice, not loud, not even spoken, unfolded inside her thoughts. "Will you trade?" The words weren't cruel. They weren't cold. They were curious, hopeful. "Will you trade one story for another?" Claire looked at the children. "You want me to stay?" Michael didn't nod, but he didn't deny it. "You don't have to," he said softly. "But we can't leave unless the story is told. And remembered." Claire stepped back. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the drawings that papered the walls, all the moments they'd lost, All the memories preserved here like dried flowers. A thought pressed into her. If I stay, they leave. If I go, they remain. But then, another thought, smaller, fainter. Maybe there's a third way. She pulled the bracelet from her pocket, the one her younger self had worn. She placed it on the table. Then she reached into her coat and took out every piece she'd collected. The first drawing, the cassette tape, the red crayon, the chalk-dusted photo, the bracelet, the unfinished notebook, and the paper with the final drawing. She laid them in the center of the table like offerings, and she whispered, "I remember you." The children looked at her. The air grew still. The walls rippled, not with heat or shadow, but with relief. The house sighed, and one by one, the children faded. Not vanished, released. Claire found herself standing in the red house's living room. The game board was gone. The circle on the wall had faded. The house was quiet. Truly quiet. For the first time since she'd come back. She walked to the window and looked out at the sidewalk. The chalk circles had washed away in the night's rain. But hers remained. And in the center of it, written in soft red, "Thank you." The street was different the next morning, not in a way anyone else might notice. The houses still stood where they always had. The trees were still bare, the wind still whispered through the eaves. But Claire felt it in her bones. Something had exhaled, the kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding until it's gone. She stepped outside with a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Across the cul-de-sac, the red house looked smaller now, not physically but in presence. The windows no longer watched, the porch no longer waited. It simply stood, like any other old house might. Just a place. She crossed the street barefoot, careful not to step on the faint chalk lines that still traced the sidewalk like veins. When she reached the spot where her own circle had been, she stopped. It was gone. All of them were, washed away in the night's gentle rain. But something remained. On the front steps of the red house sat a small wooden box. No lock, no note. She opened it. Inside, a single item. A crayon, red, worn down to a stub. And beneath it, a folded piece of notebook paper. She unfolded it slowly. A drawing, 6 children, holding hands, smiling, and one more figure. Standing apart, watching. Claire. But this time her figure was turned toward them, not away. At the bottom, a line of text written in the careful, crooked handwriting of someone who'd learned to write too young. You didn't stay, but you remembered. That's enough. Claire pressed the paper to her chest. Her hands didn't shake. Later, she found herself back in her childhood bedroom. She opened the old desk drawer and pulled out a blank notebook. Its pages were crisp, untouched. The room around her was quiet, not the silence of something waiting, but the hush of something finished. She began to write. "Dear Michael." The words came slowly at first, then faster. She wrote everything she remembered. The games, the drawings, the jokes. The rules only they knew. The last summer, the fear, the leaving, and most importantly, the returning. When the letter was done, she didn't fold it. She left it open on the desk, just in case someone else ever needed to find it. Just in case the house ever needed to remember again. Before she left Brier Lane, she stood in the attic one final time. The strange room behind the paper walls was gone now. Only old insulation, dust, forgotten boxes. But she placed the wooden box there, crayon and drawing inside, wrapped it in an old quilt, and tucked it between the rafters. Then she closed the attic door, locked it, left the key beneath the doormat of number 6, and walked away. A year passed. The red house was sold to a quiet couple with a daughter who liked to draw. They never saw anything strange, never heard whispers, never found chalk circles on the sidewalk. But one morning, the little girl came downstairs holding an old photograph. It was tucked inside the wall behind her closet. 6 children stood in a row, holding hands, smiling in front of the red house. When her mother asked who they were, the girl just shrugged. "I think they like to play here." The mother nodded and hung the photo above the fireplace. That night, the girl placed a blank piece of paper on the floor beside her bed. And in the morning, it wasn't blank anymore. It showed a new drawing, a girl with glasses and messy hair, standing at the edge of a circle, looking back, and above her a single word: remember.